This is Kyle Houchins. I'm a technical trainer for McNeil, and this is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. Got a very ambitious slash possibly stupid build I'm going to try today to try and do live. Um, anybody who's familiar with me or my background knows I used to work for a very well-known toy company as a consultant doing little cars. I'll let you connect the dots there, but I did lots and lots and lots of 64th scale diecast cars, and I was a diecast car kid all my life, and at any given point in my childhood, if you were to pick me up and shake me by the ankles, I probably would have had 15 or 20 cars fall out of my pockets and rain down around me. I went to school to be a car designer, and I ended up in the toy industry doing lots and lots and lots of vehicle design, and so I have tons of these things scattered around on my desk, and the one that I keep looking at is this GT40 Mark IV. It's the 67 GT40 Mark IV in golf livery colors, of course, because that's the only one that it should be ever painted in. And I kept looking at the thing, and I kept thinking, this thing is actually a really kind of a cool and interesting SubD project. And what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about how we approach something like that. So let's set the file up first, and then we'll get into the Zen and the thinking of how to do this thing. But so as always, I'm going to start with the picture command. I'm going to find my drawing that I scabbed together yesterday. And this is a very common scenario when I was working for unnamed toy company. I would get 4-view art like this from a designer, and it would have some dimensions on it. Most of the time, it wouldn't be even this well defined. Most of the time, it would be pretty scruffy. But this is pretty much the scenario and pretty much the layout and the way that we would get things done. And so the first thing I always needed to do, other than clear my throat, hang on just a second, is to determine how big this thing was supposed to be, right? And in this case, this thing is about 2.65-ish inches, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just take this down here for the time being, and we're going to start a line. I'm just going to hit 0 to start the line, and I'm going to type in 2.9. We'll just call it 7. And I'm going to hold down the shift key, which is going to constrain it to the x-axis. And I'm going to just drag this up in space. And then I'm going to take another line, and I'm going to just draw a little closer on there. And the reason I do this is because I know for a fact that this is exactly the size that I want. And this dimension's huge. So I'm going to go to my properties, and I'm going to just scale this down to like 0.1. And so I know that this dimension is what I'm looking for, right? And so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my drawing, and I'm going to go again in the properties. I'm going to click on the material. I'm going to increase the transparency a little bit so that I can draw over it and I can see my grid. And then I'm going to just line up the ground plane with the X axis. I'm going to stick the nose right on the Y axis, and then I'm going to scale from 0. I'll come out here and hold shift, and I'm just going to drag this down until the tail touches that line. Now, this is a little ishy. I will give you that, right? Because we're talking about, a hand-drawn piece of art, and my scabby lines have, thick and thin and stuff like that. So we have to kind of, if you're one of these people who wants to work at like 16 places past the decimal point, okay. You'll need to figure out your own system, but this is how I do it. And then the other thing that I do is I take this and I shove it back in space. And the reason I do that is because I don't like when, if I were to say, for instance, build a model and then go to shaded view, I can't see my drawing, right? I can't. It eats eats my drawing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide this back in space. And then that way I can see what's going on. And when I'm in front view, everything's lined up just the way it's supposed to be. Okay. Now, the cool thing about picture frames is if I go to my layer stack, I can take this and I can create a layer called front, and I'm going to assign this here. All right. And now if I go back and make my default the active layer, I can turn this layer on and off, and I can also lock it. Now, I'm going to create what I call a reference cube, and basically what I want to do is I'm going to copy this drawing. I'm going to just pull it back here in space, and then I'm going to rotate. That was an Alt-Shift drag, or an Alt-Tap drag, by the way. Let me do it again. So if I start dragging and I tap Alt, you'll see a little plus sign show up. See that little plus sign showing up next to my cursor? That tells you that when I let go, there's going to be a copy. And if I click on this and I look at the direction of my arrows, if I rotate in the -90, because the arrows are going one way and I want it to go the other, it's going to just rotate like that. Now, the cool thing is because I just dragged it back in space, I know, let's assume that my 4-view art is lined up and all that kind of stuff. I can come and I can drag this in the top view, and all I need to do is kind of vaguely find my center, and you know, I'm guessing here, but I'm going to aim kind of something like that. And then I'm going to drag this down in space down here so that it's out of the modeling cube. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the front and the rear. For this model, by the way, just to, set expectations, this isn't gonna be a finished model. we're not going all the way. We're not going all the way to the finish line here. We're gonna get this. We're gonna get the main body form lined out, and I'm gonna talk about the main goals here. I want to talk about topology. I want to talk about strategy. I want to talk about how you break something complicated down like this, and how you approach a model like this. So let's grab. Man, I gotta clear. I'm gonna mute out for a second. My voice is misbehaving. So it happens when you work in a basement by yourself all the time and never talk to anybody. So I'm gonna take this again and I'm gonna Alt Tap, and then I'm gonna click up here and I'm gonna rotate 90 in this way. I'm gonna go to my right hand view and I'm going to set my front view in place. And again, I'm just kind of aiming vaguely for the center here. I may have to make a little adjustment. There is a little break in the line because I did this drawing using Sketchbook Pro, and they have a symmetry function that I use. So there's a little skip in the center of the line where the two lines didn't touch. And then I'm going to drag this here. Actually, counterintuitive, but the front view I'm going to put back here because if I'm working on the front view, I'm going to be looking at it from this direction. And if I'm working on the back view, I'm going to be looking at it from this direction. And then I'm going to drag and I'm just going to Alt Tap over here and I'm going to line up the rear view with front view, and those should line up on top of each other. So what we want to do is those should just line up right on top of each other if the drawing is done well. And in this case, you can see my symmetry's off. We won't talk about that, but it's a little fatter on the right-hand side than it is on the left-hand side. But what you get. You get what you pay for. These webinars are free. All right, so let's set up the rest of our reference cube here. So I'm going to double click this layer. I'm going to make this top, and I'm going to assign this here. And then I'm going to make this layer front. Oh, I guess this should actually be side. And this should be front. And so this is going to be our front view. And we've got top, we've got side. And that's going to go up there. Front view. And then we need rear, and sign this here. And now what we should do is we should have our reference cube that we can turn on and off, right, as needed. I don't like to have a lot of clutter on the screen, so if I'm only working in the front view, I'll shut these other ones off and just use this. And then I always just lock this stuff so that I can't pick it. And that's why I do this. That's why I do it on a layer, and that's why I do it on separate layers, is so I can kind of declutter the screen as I'm working on this. So now that we have that set up, we know what our size is. I can get rid of this because it's locked. I don't need to look at it. Like I said, I like to kind of minimize the clutter. Let's go into a paint program for a second, Autodesk Sketchbook. I don't like shilling for Autodesk, but in this case, they make a really good paint program and I like it. So there you go. Let's open this drawing and let's take a look at it. Where'd you go? There it is. And let's talk a little bit about layout and topology. So I'm going to throw a layer over this and I'm going to drop this a little bit and let's do some thinking. And I know it's not something that we really like to do as modelers, but let's give it a shot for today. So this thing basically, if I look at it, is very, very straight. Okay, it's very straight in the front, very straight in the side. It's got a little arc in the back. And with that, you can say, okay, let's slice this thing into a couple of pieces. There's a right side, right? And there's a left side, or left side, right side. And then there's stuff in the middle, right? So that lends itself very well to what I like to refer to as paper doll modeling, which means we can build this thing flat and then kind of distort the pieces, almost like you were cutting this out of sheets of paper and then taping the edges together. That's kind of the thing that we're going to do. And so what we want to look at is say, okay, this shape here is going to be our first paper doll, right? And we have to accommodate for the wheel arches, and we have to figure out how that all goes together. And the formula for cars is you always start with the wheel arches. We always start with a little strip of faces around here, right? And then we connect these together and then we figure out how to go from there. So basically, let's just say for simplified sake that this is going to be our topology, right? We're going to have a wheel arch and it's going to have a face here. It's going to have a face up there. It's going to have a face here and it's going to have a face down there. Same thing back here, one face. And I do this, for what it's worth, I actually do this for every model I work on. I do this little kind of chalk talk with myself to try and figure out like what my topology is going to look like. So we're going to have a face here. We're going to have a face up here that's going to kind of do that, right? And we're going to have another one that kind of does this, right? And then we're going to have another one out here. And I know my sketch is terrible and you're like, wait a minute, what does that thing look like? It makes sense to me. Pay attention. We'll figure it out later. All right. And so what we're going to do is basically lay this out. This is our post-it notes, right? And if you've watched any of my other videos, I talk about SubD modeling as a lot like if you were to take stacks of post-it notes and stick them together, those individual post-it notes make up the topology of your model. Once we have all this, the basic topology laid out, then we can decide, do we need more faces? Do we need less faces? Does a face need to go like this or what? We'll figure all that out as we go. But this main paper doll, as we lay this thing out, is essentially just going to be a flat shape. Then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of just bend the nose and we're going to maybe poke this in a little bit, maybe poke this out a little bit, maybe poke this out a little bit to give it a little Coke bottle. This car actually is very, very straight, and I keep wanting to add shape to it just because my designer eye wants to add shape to it, but in reality, this thing is almost dead flat on the sides. Then we need to look at the top of this and say, okay, we've got our side view layout, right? We've got that figured out. Now, the top view layout, when we connect this stuff, right, it's gotta kind of make sense in a way that, like, there's probably going to be a face there like that. There's probably going to be a face up here like this. There's probably going to be a line down the center. And then we can kind of just lay this out, right, in a way that kind of makes sense. And you can kind of see how it all starts to pull together. And this shape up here, because there's a little like fender arc there, this shape up here is probably going to do something like this. Right? So it's got that little shape in there. This thing's probably going to come like that. Here, here, and now we're just connecting the dots, right? This thing's going to come up that and over. This is going to come back like that, and then these are going to start to connect. And you can do this for yourself. And this is, I really recommend doing this, is to sit down and go through this process and say, okay, this is how this thing breaks up logically, right? Then the only other thing that we need to take into account is, where are our transitions? Where does the model bend, right? And when we bend a model, we need 3 edges. So we could do it just like this, right? We could do it like that, but each one of these edges would have to be creased, right? So in order to get these to bend, we're actually going to need 1 row of edges above, right? This edge is here. And we're going to need, this is our bend line, the apex of our bend, which is this line. And then because this thing is almost dead flat on the side, you can't see this one, but let's just say it's kind of tucked under here, right? And so that layout, right? And if we were to do this in box mode, it would just be doot, 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 right? We got edges like that. And so we have to then think about, like, okay, where are our rule of 3, our bends and all that stuff gonna have to happen. So we're gonna have to have one here. We're gonna have to have, we're gonna have to have one kind of here, here. You're gonna start seeing it, right? You're gonna start saying, oh, well, there's got to be one here too, right? So it starts to give you a little bit of a roadmap on how you do this stuff. And when you break it down like that and you say, okay, where are my primary surfaces? That's just the topology, the most simple version of the topology. Then where are my transitions? And we're going to add edges above and below where those transitions are. Then we can start refining and start saying, okay, like, where do we actually need to start doing some shape? And that's when you start popping back into smooth mode and starting to evaluate and adjust and refine and all that kind of stuff. All right. Does that make sense so far? Feel free to hit the chat, by the way. These sessions are intended to be interactive. I don't want you to just sit there and be befuddled and try and figure out what in the world I'm talking about. I did bring some wheels in. These actually are original wheels from my previous life. And I'm going to just scale these just a little bit. And the other thing, by the way, 64th scale cars are vastly different proportions than real cars in real life. So, like, if you were to scale up a 64th scale car into real size, much like it would be if you scaled up a fashion doll, the wheels would be gigantic, all that kind of stuff. So there is some proportional things that we're going to deal with. And then I'm going to set this, and let's bring up our top view. And let's just set the wheels so we know where they are. I'm going to set that there. And then this one I'm going to set here. And die-cast cars, I always like to have the wheels poke out just a little bit because it looks cooler. And then we're going to just lock the wheels lock that layer so that they can't go anywhere. And I'm actually going to change the color. I'm going to make it gray just so that they're a little less obvious, like that, so that we can focus on the body instead of focusing on the details. All right, so we talked about our layout, and let's just start in on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a SubD primitive, and I'm going to start with a cylinder, and I do want it to have a cap, and I'm going to start here, and I'm going to just scale out, and then I'm going to set that to just 1. And you can see that we end up with just this SubD cylinder. And what I'm going to do, which seems a little counterintuitive, but I'm going to Shift Control drag all of this and just delete it, because I really don't want the cylinder. I really want the, you know, the face. And so I'm going to Shift Control drag, grab some verts, and I'm going to start dragging this to kind of match my wheel arch. And when I get this reasonably close, then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to push this up. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab this, pull this down a little bit, and I'm going to make a wheel arch strip. And I'm going to do that by, I'm going to set my gumball to the center. I'm going to start dragging. I'm going to hold down Shift, and then I'm going to scale it out a little bit, and then I'm going to hit Control. And what that's going to do is it's going to extrude out a little strip of faces. Then I'm going to Shift Control drag. I'm going to get rid of the center. Right? Now, that is kind of the easiest way that I've found in order to make this wheel arch strip. And then what I like to do, because it's going to make our lives a lot easier if these match, I'm going to just drag this back. Tap Alt, and then I'm going to just adjust this to meet the shape of my rear wheel arch. And this is, there's a lot of tutorials out there, and there's a lot of people talking about different ways to do things. The wheel arch strip is a pretty universal way of getting going with cars. And so this is something that I adopted because I was watching some other folks do this, and I liked it, so I stole it and claimed it as my own. Now, if we hit tab, you can see that, you know, the shape of our wheel arches is kind of like that. Now, to make our lives easy, I'm going to just go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to bridge, and I'm going to add a couple of segments in here. Not a ton, just a few. And then I'm going to Shift drag select. I'm doing all of this in box mode, by the way. I do all of my original layout in box mode, and I do that very, very intentionally. And it's up like that. And pull this up like that. Pull this guy up like that. Pull that out maybe a little bit. Same thing down here. And you can see how this kind of fell together really quickly, because now I can just go 1, 2, 3, you know, Shift Control click this, and then drag the extrude ball, and then I can get probably, I'm going to just do one edge for now. I'm probably going to need 2 because there is some shape back there, but it is start as simple as possible. We don't want to add any edges that we don't need at the moment. And the same thing here. Grab these 2 edges, extrude, and I'm going to come all the way out. And then we can always refine and add more later if we need it. When we need it. We will need it, but we can always do that later. All right, so now we're going to just do a little cleanup and say, okay, let's put this in, and let's make this in shapes that aren't horrific. And so I'm going to just pull this around a little bit. I like to have these kind of be a little even and dog barking. That gives us our basic shape, right? And I might pull this in a little bit. If we hit the tab key and go to smooth mode, you can see that we are pretty close here. We might need to refine a little bit. You know, this might need to pull down a little bit like that. And this might need to pull up a little bit like this. And this is going to need a crease because we want a sharp edge on that. That we want to roll. This one, where are you? There you are. And that one probably both need a crease. So let's stick those there. And then let's just do a little bit of refining. We don't need to get crazy at this point, but we want to kind of at least be in the neighborhood. We don't want to add more stuff than we need, right? We don't want to just like add edges and edges and edges. What we want to do is pull what we have as far as we can before it starts becoming, you know, before it kind of turns to trash. And then we want to kind of back up and then add an edge if we need to. I really, really encourage you to reduce, reduce, reduce instead of add, add, add. That is going to be the way that your SubD models are going to become manageable. I'm just creasing these corners so that we get nice sharp edges down here. Vert, actually, so that we get nice sharp corners around all that stuff, right? So that's our basic shape. Now, if we go to the top view, we can grab this shape, and you can see that I kind of missed here on this. So I'm just going to drag this back and use snap and flatten it out. And then we're going to grab this entire thing. We're just going to place it right over our art. Now, here's one of my favorite tricks ever. I'm going to turn on the points for this SubD. And I'm going to drag these points, and then I'm going to use the bend tool. And I'm going to bend this back like that. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to just drag like these, and I'm going to bend, and I'm going to kind of start somewhere in here, and this around. And it's going to get close. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to have to do some refining, but it gets us kind of in the neighborhood, so to speak. And obviously, like, you know, we need 1, 2, 3 edges in order to be able to make this bend, and we don't have them. So we'll get them at some point, but this is going to get us close to start with. And this gives us our basic starting point of this model. And now what I can do is I can either just mirror, right, and just go right across the center line and bridge. I can just grab these edges and these edges and just bridge. And that is going to give us the basis of the body. And we have to make a decision. Do we want to build a lower and an upper as 2 separate pieces, or do we want to do this kind of as a upper lower kind of conglomerate? And in this case, I think I'm probably going to do that instead. So I'm not going to bridge this, but if I was going to build the lower as one piece and the upper as a second piece, the cabin and the greenhouse area, I would do it this way. I would bridge this so that I'd have the bottom. And I'd do the same thing with the front and back, and I'd probably leave the bottom open for the time being. But the thing that we want to do now is, instead of that, we're going to go to the top view, and I'm actually going to get rid of this because I'm just going to work on one side at a time. And then what we're going to do is grab this whole top edge, and we're just going to use the extrude dot, and we're going to come over, and I'm going to come over all the way for right now. And you can see how this thing is kind of, and I'm going to go to box mode. This thing's kind of falling together already. Like, see how this all kind of like See how this like kind of starts to come together. Like this is going to come back here. This is going to come out here and make that wheel arch, that bulge for the front tire. And this maybe is probably going to have to come back to like the A-pillar. And then we've got our kind of basic layout already. Like we can kind of start to look at this and say, okay, well, now we've got kind of the basic layout. So now what are we going to do? Well, from here, I can grab these edges and I can come straight up. And then I go back to the front view and just put these where they need to be. This is all easy stuff. We're just moving points around, right? I'm not even moving points artistically. I'm just moving points XYZ and with gumball, right? And once we get basic layout set up, and it looks like I need to come up a little bit here. This is why we keep it simple, by the way. The simpler you keep it, the easier you're going to be able to deal with stuff. I'm going to pull that forward a little bit. That maybe a little higher. Yeah, so recording will be available of the session. And then we go to the top view. And let's grab this edge. It's all of these get posted on our YouTube page, Rhinoceros 3D on YouTube. All right, and so this, like these actually are in the right spot, but these two front ones need to come over quite a bit. So let's grab those. Just pull those over to kind of where they would need to be, like that. Back where it needs to be. And see how this is kind of starting to fall together? That's what we want. That's how you know you're on the right path when in box mode, when you start to say, oh, look at that. It's actually like I can see all the forms and they all make sense. And that all kind of is doing what I expect it to do. And and life is pretty grand. That's how you know you're on the right path. All right, so we've got this part done. And now we can actually mirror it because now we're in a position where we can just use bridge to do the heavy lifting. I'm going to bridge those, and I'm going to just use one segment, two segments, sorry, because I want a center line, and that connects the top and the bottom. And if we go to shaded mode, you can see how this is starting to come together. And if I go to smooth mode, you can see now these are creased. If I take these creases out, see how those highlights are starting to come together? But these transitions aren't tight enough. So that means that we would need to add an edge top and bottom in order to get that to tighten up, because this rule of three on this right now is this is 1, 2, 3. So this is what's causing the transition, and those are too far apart. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say rule of three, by the way, there is a video on YouTube, on our Rhino YouTube, called Rule of Three. This one, SubD Rule of Three. I'll put the link in the chat so that you can see it. And that is kind of the fundamental basis of making transitions in SubD, right? We make transitions by just having 3 edges. We don't have 16 edges. We don't have 25 edges. Just 3. Just 1, 2, 3. So let's go to the top view again. And let's put together our windshield. And in this case, I'm going to bridge these two together. And pull this up. Now, we may have to play with the position of this, like that might need to be there, whatever. And you'll notice that I did this and it's not set up symmetrically. I'm not really worrying too much about symmetry right now because I can always just grab this and delete it and then mirror it over. Or I could actually throw a reflect on this and work symmetrically. I don't really worry too much about symmetry right at the very beginning. I tend to kind of try and find the way along the way, and then once I get to the point where I want to, start worrying about symmetry and stuff like that, then I'll get that going. But for now, I'm just working on layout. So I'm gonna pull this over to about here, and then I'm gonna grab my gumball and I'm gonna set it here by doing gumball relocate, and then I'm gonna actually scale this to 0, which is gonna flatten that. Slide this forward a little bit, and then I'm gonna go to wireframe. I'm gonna shift control drag these 2 points, and I'm gonna stitch them. And that gives me my edge here that I need. So let's take a look at this now. And we've got our basic layout. We haven't done our nose or our tail, but that's fine. And let's switch to box mode and just take a look. I'm going to get rid of this crease. And we've got our hard edge. And if I wanted to, I could crease these, and that would give me a little better indication of kind of what this thing is looking like. And you can see we don't have enough detail here because this is too soft. So we need to actually add edges in order to get this to come across, and we'll get there. But let's finish out the front and the back on this as well. So I'm just going to grab this, and this is now a counting exercise. So, and I'm going to crease this one so that it's sharp. I've got 1, 2, 3 edges here, which means I need to grab these, and I need to come over 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to set my gumball on this point and then scale to 0 so that I know that that's flattened out. And then switch to wireframe. And then I'm going to take this point and this point, stitch them together, this point and this point, stitch them together. And I have a hotkey set up for stitch, by the way, if you're wondering how I'm doing that. I just have a hotkey set up for the stitch command. And I'm going to crease these edges to give myself that sharpness back. And I'm going to lose these creases here. This one. The dark lines are the creased lines, by the way. That's how you identify which ones are creased and which ones aren't. All right. And I'm going to crease that so it kind of keeps it making sense. And then same thing up here. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to go 1, and then I'm going to go 2. And I'm going to stitch this point. Any questions so far? That one. This one. This one. And I'm going to crease this edge, just crazy on me. And crease that one. So now we've got our basic layout. And if we mirror this, and I'm going to grab the entire center line. Flatten this out first so that we don't make a mess of it. Set the gumball to here, scale to 0. That flattens out that whole edge. Now we can mirror correctly. And then if I join it with the SubD set to smooth, it does not put a crease down the center of the model. And when we hit the tab button, voila, we have the basis of what we want to start looking at for this model. Okay, so 39 minutes with a little bit of blabbing and some drawing, so really probably a half hour. We have this thing kind of mocked up already. We have it kind of like, the basis of this thing is kind of starting to dial in. And so now what we can do is we can start doing things like this, where if I shift control drag and I get this ring, we can add an edge here. And I'm going to add an edge in the middle of this. And the reason I'm doing that is I've got 1, 2, 3 edges, which means this edge here controls how this shape behaves. So now I can start adding that curvature and make it do what I want it to do instead of having it be straight like that. And I'm going to knock this crease off, knock that one off, and that gives me a little bit closer version of what I'm looking for, right? So now we can start playing with this and refining it and getting it to do what we want to do. Now, this thing has a really big fat radius around the entire model, which means that we don't have enough information in order to roll this edge. Because if I just take this crease off, watch what happens. It gets really soft, but it also doesn't give me much ability to be able to control that. I guess I could, slide this edge up and down. Maybe I retract my former statement. That actually does give us kind of what we need. So let's do that instead of adding edges. So we can sharpen that up a little bit. And then I can even, if I want to, experiment with removing edges to try and soften stuff, and it looks like that's not going to work. That actually kind of does a nice thing. And then we need to kind of, every time we do that, we need to kind of pull the thing back into shape a little bit and decide, is that really what we wanted to have happen? In this case, we probably need to slide some edges around. And if we go to box mode, we can start. And maybe we do actually need to add a point here. So let's add a point here. We can get a little bit more shape in that corner. And if you notice that we had a triangle before, and so I just added a point to that, and that point turned that triangle back into a quad, which SubD likes quads. If you can work in quads, I highly recommend you working in quads. All right, so let's take a look and see what's going on here. This nose is kind of sticking out too far. And that's why I like working in box mode, because it allows you to be able to see that stuff really, really clearly. If you have an organized box mode, your smooth mode is just going to happen. You don't really have to sweat it very much. If your box mode starts getting really out of control, then your smooth mode is going to follow. And in this case, probably what I'm going to do is to just get rid of half this model and work on half of it. And I'll put the symmetry back on at another date, because it just adds more complexity than I need to deal with right at this minute. And so I'm gonna just pull this around. So see how this is kind of nice and organized, and I can kind of see what's going on here, and it all kind of makes sense. Just go in and get your stuff kind of all lined up, right? All the little verts, just and maybe we pull this forward. And in smooth mode, you can see that this thing has kind of started to come together already. And now it's maybe time to talk about like, let's maybe get rid of these creases. If we get rid of this crease, but we bevel it instead, which means we're going to add an edge top and bottom, now we've got a soft transition that we can mess with. And this thing kind of fades out to the back. So what I might want to do actually, I may actually want to delete this and let that fade out as it goes away. And I may even get rid of this one. See how that transition now starts to disappear and it starts to become a lot smoother like that. In fact, I may even get rid of that. So this give and take, this ability to be able to like try stuff and say, ooh, look at that highlight. That's fantastic. See how that like pulled back and was really sharp like that? And then we got rid of it. It just kind of sings around that corner now. And then it fades out back here. Look at that. That's what we're looking for. And then we can also do things like grab this and slide, and we can determine like where that highlight starts to fade now. Like, does it tuck in like that or does it pull out? You know, we can kind of interactively go through and decide where we want that stuff to go. And in this case, the back end of this thing is actually quite sharp. So I'm actually going to pull these 2 points. I'm going to slide them over to sharpen that rear end a little bit. But I'm also going to pull this up a little bit to give that a little bit of, you know, give it some hips, right? It's got that little kind of bulge in there. And I might even pull this one down just a little bit. And this is where SubD, to me, this is where SubD starts to get really, really fun, because you can start exploring and start to see stuff and in the highlights and start designing things where you're like, ooh, I didn't necessarily expect that to happen, but look at that. Now, and that gives you this ability to be able to really dial in how these shapes happen. And that to me is really, really fun. This is where I really start to enjoy kind of working in SubD. And the hood line on this thing is actually a little bit lower in the center. Actually, it's quite a bit lower in the center. So I'm going to grab all of these. I'm going to actually scale these. Let's do it with gumball. I'm going to set the gumball there. I have a hotkey set up for my gumball relocate, by the way. I highly recommend doing that. It gives you a lot of control over stuff. Like, so see this awful dent I made right here? I can pick these edges and I can set my gumball here, and then I can scale. If I scale to that handle, see how I can kind of pull that out? And I use scale very often instead of move, because it gives you a lot more control over what's going on. Now, I don't have enough information. What I need to do is I need like a little OG curve here on the front. I need this to kind of come up and drop and then kind of flatten a little bit like we did on the back. And I don't have enough information to be able to do that. So let's add an edge. And I'm just going to throw it in here. And the nice thing about this with Rhino is it's very, very flexible and it's very, very durable. So I can kind of throw an edge in here kind of anywhere I want it to be, and then deal with the consequences of what I've done. So I'm going to scale this a little flatter, and then I'm going to pull it down a little bit. And you can see my fender appears. See that? Now, in order to get it to fade out, I may even just stitch these two together and let that triangle out in the front. And I can adjust this shape accordingly. because I've got that extra information in there, I now have enough, data in order to be able to get that. Maybe I don't want this to go this far. Maybe I want this to Z out farther. Maybe these two are the ones that need to stitch instead of the others. See how that flattens out up farther up the nose? Maybe this one needs to come this way. By the way, there's an incredible build on our forum right now. One of our users built a Ferrari Dino, and it is absolute stunning example of SubD awesomeness. I highly recommend you check it out. So that gives us our shape in the front, and we can decide, like, does this need to go forward or back or whatever. This is the fun stuff where we can start actually adjusting and like picking at the highlights and things like that. So now let's throw a reflect on this and see what it looks like. So if I pick this and let's reflect it this way, that gives us a reflect. And now if we mess with this over here, now it's going to operate in symmetry and we can really start getting some work done. Now, the back of this thing is actually quite sharp. It actually has a really hacked off rear end. And so let's get that dialed in. And what I'm going to do, watch this. See how this is all kind of jacked up here? What I want to do is I want to start with a straight line first, and then I want to fix it. What commands do you use most in your SubD modeling? What hotkeys, custom or otherwise, do you use most often? I most often use Gumball, to be honest. Gumball, shift control select for sub-object selection, which allows you to pick a face, an edge, or a vert, depending on the context of what you're picking. And then extrude, stitch, bridge. I mean, that's really about it. The tool set is very, very, very light, which is one of the things I like. How you use those tools is kind of the magic of this whole thing. So I'm gonna straighten out this back end. I'm gonna do this in box mode, and check this out. If I grab this entire thing, and I'm gonna gumball relocate down here. Now, if I just scaled this flat, it's gonna do that, right? Which is kind of not what I want. What I kind of want it to do is I kind of want to be able to scale like so that it lines up with that, right? So let's grab this entire thing back here. I'm going to gumball relocate down here. Now I'm going to hold down Control before I do anything. So my right hand's up in the air, nothing's on the mouse. I'm going to hold down Control, and that's going to allow me to modify the location of the gumball. And I'm going to line it up vaguely with the rear end of this thing, right? Very vaguely with, the orientation of what this. Now when I scale this, watch what happens. Whoop. And then I can pull and put it just about where I want. And then I can just kind of, tuck the tail under. Maybe if I go to wireframe, maybe what I want to do is add a little bit of curvature to the back of this thing. Right, so we added that curvature, and now when I go in there, now it lines up, almost exactly with what I wanted it to do. Cool? That's one of my favorite gumball tricks. All right, we're closing in on an hour, and that's kind of, I wanted to get into, this very ambitious build, but I kind of wanted to knock it off in about an hour to show you where we were. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's just sharpen up this A pillar just a little bit, because I know there's a little bit of question on how that's going to work with you and with me. We'll see. We'll give it a shot together. And I'm going to do this in box mode, and I want this to be nice and tight like that. And let's go back to smooth mode and see what kind of mess we made. And in this case, it did kind of make a little bit of a mess, right? That's kind of not what we were kind of hoping for. And so now we need to start saying, okay, well, what in the topology down here is a mess, and what do we need to work with? And so I'm going to start, anytime I do something that doesn't work the way I want it to, the first thing I do is start pulling shapes out and see if I can fix what I broke. And in that case, that kind of did it, right? And then I can say, okay, well, how does this, because this is a mess in here, maybe this one goes away, maybe these two stitch. And this is when I start kind of searching and say, I'd love to say I know what I'm doing, but really a lot of the times I just stumble around until I bump into something that works. And, we can look at this stuff and say, at what point did we get what we want? And I would say that that's probably not what we wanted. And so what we'll probably need to do is chase this edge probably out to the front. So let's go to box mode. Let's grab this edge and let's pull it around like that. And then let's chase it using this insert point. And I'm going to snap to here, and then I'm just going to pull this all the way out. Now, the one thing that we may end up getting out of this for free is we might end up getting the fact that we don't need this edge anymore, and we'll have to play with it and see. It may be unnecessary, and it may be causing us more problems than it's worth. But in this case, you can see that it's kind of doing a little bit what we wanted it to do. And if I slide this edge forward, that, and then same thing, I'm going to slide this one up a little bit to really sharpen that edge. Then we can say, well, we're now starting to get a little closer to what we want. So now we got to go back to our art, and let's go to wireframe, and we can say, okay, now we gotta go back and try and get some semblance of reference to our art. In this case, this whole thing needs to like push like way forward like this. And we're going to kind of use that, that highlight line is going to kind of be an apex of where that is going to go. All right, so let's look and see. So that kind of gives us a much better defined version of what we were looking for. And occasionally, we're going to switch to wireframe, and we're going to go back and we're going to look at our art, and we're going to just kind of just do a couple of little subtle tweaks to, put the lines back where they were supposed to be, depending on what we did. In this case, this whole thing needs to come up just here. It needs to come up a hair. And that is going to give us basically kind of what, the basic layout of kind of what we're looking for. And from here, we're right at about an hour, which is kind of all I wanted to throw at you this morning, is gives us kind of what we need to get where we need to go. Now, I'm going to delete that and just see if we can get away with not having that. And I think we can. Whoa, mute your mics. If you have a question, throw it in the chat, please. For some reason, when you unmute your mics, it's really loud in my head. I'm wearing headphones. All right. And I don't like that line. Let's clean that up a little bit. All right. So that's about as far as I want to go today. And let's unlock the wheels and let's just mirror those, because we get a good look at kind of where we are. And from here you could see that, okay, I've got my main body laid out, and we could fuss this farther, and we could add a few more edges, take some edges away, mess with the shapes a little bit, and continue to refine this, right? You don't need to watch me do that for another 45 minutes of pushing a vert a millimeter to the left and to the right. Nobody needs to watch that. But what you can see is if you were to do that, you can get to these shapes very, very quickly. Then what I would most likely do is I would convert to NURBS and I'd start adding my details. You know, there's always this conversation of like, okay, well, this intake on the front here on this nose, like, how do I do that intake? Well, it's super easy. Just convert the thing to NURBS and trim the shape. You know, this stuff goes back and forth really, really well. And so when you do this stuff and when you work on these models, don't get stuck thinking that you have to do everything in NURBS. Get it down the road as far as you need it to get down the road in SubD, and then bounce it to NURBS and finish it the way that you already know how to do modeling. You know, there's no reason why this thing has to be finished in SubD. And I would encourage you to not get stuck in that mindset where you think that this whole thing has to be done in NURBS, because it doesn't. And in fact, you're holding yourself back if you try to force this whole thing to be in NURBS, because SubD does some stuff really, really well. It does stuff like this way better than NURBS does, right? This would make you mental trying to make this transition. But if you wanted to try and build this shape, NURBS is going to get you there a lot easier than it would be if you tried to have to, you know, subdivide this to get enough detail in order to be able to put that in. So what I would typically do at this point is I would most likely take this, I'd make a new layer, and I'd call it SubD parts car. And I would make a copy, and then I would lock it, and I would hide it. And then I would take this thing and I'd use the toNURBS command, and I would switch this to NURBS. Now this is a standard Rhino polysurface. And I come over here and I shut my ISOs off so that I can see what my layout is. And now this is just a regular Rhino model now. You can trim it, you can Boolean it, you can split it, you can do whatever you want. And that is now where something is going to become super useful. Now, the reason I create that SubD parts car layer is if I get down the road and my client says, hey, you know, I really want a change in this transition back here. I don't like that. Then I would just bring this back. I would make the modification, and then I would incorporate that new piece into, you know, into the model. And that's never fun. I never love that. Old clients are listening. You've always made me crazy when you did that, when you said, yeah, let's go. And then I convert it to NURBS and add all the details and cut lines and windows and all that kind of stuff. And then you say, you know, I really wanted to see this form a little bit later. That ship has sailed. You owe me money now. But the fact is that happens. And so I try to prepare for that by keeping the original. And you can see that the conversion is exact. You know, when you go from SubD to NURBS, it's exact. So what you had in SubD just turns to NURBS, and you can keep going. So if we were to add details and stuff like that in here, then, you know, you'd be able to just keep your curves. You know, I have a curves layer that I keep all my curves. When I do cut lines, I keep all that stuff on a layer and all that kind of stuff. So if I have to reconstruct something, I can. All right. So that's about as far as I want to go. And well, it's not as far as I want to go. I'd really like to take this all the way to the end and do the entire thing, but then that'll be like a 4-hour video and nobody wants to sit around for that long. But I hope that what that gives you is a clear picture, or at least a good idea of how you can approach these forms. And, you know, the simple idea of laying it out flat. Once you've got it laid out flat, then figure out what your thickness is. Then once you've got your thickness figured out, then bridge the two flat pieces together. Now you've got a volume. Once you've got a volume, does it go up or down? You know, and that's where rule of three kicks in. And once you start to get in the mindset of how SubD works, then, you know, the the gloves come off for what kind of forms that you can create and how fast you can create them. Like trying to make this body and NURBS before SubD, you could do it, but it would have taken quite some time. Okay. Typically a build like this, I would have budgeted in NURBS, I would have budgeted like, 4 or 5 days, like start to finish for a for a diecast project. With SubD, I would still budget 4 or 5 days and I would charge for 4 or 5 days because that's how much, you know, actual value is in this thing. But the actual time that it takes is actually much less. So SubD for me as a consultant was a huge profitability increase because it increased my throughput so much and the quality of the deliverable so much because of the forms that I could now create. But I still charged for the value of the actual deliverable of the model because the path to get there is decided by me. The deliverable and the price of the deliverable is negotiated at the beginning of the project. And so anything that you can do as a consultant to increase your speed and quality, that is essentially going to turn into instant return on, profitability, which is what you want, right? Because it's hard enough to do this stuff for a living, let alone go broke doing it. So that's kind of where I would like to end for today. Are there any other questions? Anything else that I can answer for you, or anything that I breezed through that you want to see again? I'm more than happy to back up and show something again if you missed it. All right, speak now or catch me on YouTube. By the way, our YouTube channel is Rhinoceros 3D, and I'll throw the link in there. That's our YouTube. Subscribe, hit the bell, and if you do that, it'll ding at you anytime that we put up new stuff. I try to put up new videos about once a month or so. We had a little dry period in the middle of the summer when everybody was out playing instead of modeling, but now we're kind of back in the swing of things here. And it's going to start raining here in Seattle probably in the next month or so. So I'll have nothing else better to do than sit in my basement and make 3D modeling videos. So you should see some more stuff coming. If you're a Rhino 7 user, one thing I want to point out is one of the cool things about Rhino is the new versions are always available to current license holders. If you are a Rhino 7 owner, not an eval user, but if you're an owner, hit this Serengeti build. This is Rhino 8. You can try it now, see the stuff that's in it. There's some cool stuff coming. Um, hit the forums and check it out. This will take you to a forum post that talks about all the other stuff that's going to get thrown on here. And the details and download is listed right here. So that's for Rhino 7 owners. We do that for every release. So if you're a Rhino 8 holder, you'll get access to Rhino 9 in the beta. And you'll be able to help direct the development because we do this for you. We are a privately held company. We do not have shareholders. You are the people that we work for, and we don't ship a new version of Rhino until you tell us it's good. So that's where we are. I think that's about it. Any other questions? Let me know. My email is kyle@mcneil.com. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm the outside on the forum. If you want to hit me up on the forum, I'm at the outside. And other than that, I'll let you go. I'm Kyle Houchins, Tech and a Trainer for McNeil. This is getting started Rhino for Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks. Bye.